America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Jamie Bowers and I'm filling in for Job Creators Network Foundation President Elaine Parker.
And I'm Tony Angelini, Senior Vice President of Operation and Advocacy for Job Creators Network.
Please subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're joined by another member of the JCN team, Karen Harned. Karen is JCN's Senior Vice President of Policy and helps us navigate all the craziness coming out of Washington. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there is a lot happening when it comes to craziness in Washington. More on that later. Karen, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Karen, you're up on Capitol Hill pretty often. You're dealing with all of these folks and you get to hear all the gossip and rumors and everything else. One of the things that, JCN clearly cares about is about the regulatory state. And the current administration has definitely ramped up the amount of regulations going out there, especially when it comes to small businesses. So earlier this year, JCN put out a report kind of calculating the financial impact that all those regulations have had on the economy. Can you talk a little bit about what that report found?
Correct. Yes. The report found what every small business owner knows. Regulations and the regulatory state disproportionately impact small businesses. This, as you noted, the Biden-Harris administration has been very aggressive in their rulemaking. They have issued 923 rules so far, and the number continues to get added. This is dwarfing any other administration that we've ever seen before, and the impact is $1.6 trillion on the economy. But for the small business owner, what this really means is just a lot of new mandates and requirements and paperwork obligations that they have. And because most small business owners are the ones that actually are doing all the regulatory compliance, it really hits our job creators the worst because they are having to, in addition to doing the marketing, growing the business, hiring the employees, they are also, and interfacing with their customers, they're also having to figure out what the newest regulation is that's going to impact their business. How will it impact their business? What do they need to do to comply? A lot of these things are just very costly because a lot of times that's stuff they're going to end up having to hire a consultant or an attorney for, or take precious time away from their business. I remember talking to a business owner, and he had just finished a 36-hour training course mandated by the Department of Homeland Security that only he was allowed to do as the business owner. That is almost a full work week that he lost just complying with regulations.
Wow, that is crazy. And what have been the techniques or the tactics to implement all these? Because I assume some of these have to go through Congress, but clearly the administration has found a way to implement a lot of regulations that have not gotten congressional approval.
Right. So as Congress passes laws, then once those laws are passed, the agencies are supposed to interpret them and execute them. And they're supposed to stay in the path of what Congress said. We have two problems. Congress now has been passing laws that give agencies wide discretion to actually fill in the blanks. It's basically a fill in the blank law, and the agency has the authority to do that. But honestly, what we've seen with this administration more is they go to their law library and their agency, EPA, Department of Transportation, IRS, name the agency, and they say, we want to do this. So let's see if we can find a law that Congress has ever passed that would allow us to do this. So we're seeing them dig back 20, 30, 40 years to find a way to regulate the way they want to regulate. And that is why we're going to, and I know we're going to get into this, you're seeing more and more legal challenges because they are 100% outside of their lane on many of these law regulations that they're enacting now.
Sure. Well, speaking of lawsuits, talk about the Chevron case and what did that do to kind of help curb, or what will it do because it just passed, or just the case was just decided? What will it do to kind of hamper any administration's ability to kind of massage those laws and put in regulations that that go way beyond what Congress intended?
Right. So it was a really hallmark decision in this space that the Supreme Court, it was the very end of its term, it issued. And Chevron deference is named after a case that did involve the oil company Chevron. But after that, that's where we're going to get rid of the oil company and just talk about what it did, which is it said that whenever somebody challenges a regulation and says, we think that the agency doesn't have authority to do this or that mandate, then the courts are obligated whenever there's a question of, whenever there's ambiguity, the courts are obligated to give the benefit of the doubt to the agency. So if you're challenging these regulations, going in that the thumb's already on the scale of the agency. So a lot of times what you've seen is regulations that are pretty iffy not getting challenged. And the main reason they're not getting challenged is because people don't want to spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring attorneys to challenge a regulation when they know the decks are stacked against them and they're likely not going to win the lawsuit anyway. Well, the thumb has come off the scale, and now we're all on an equal playing field. So you're going to see more and more challenges and more opportunities to challenge regulations as a result of that decision. Plus, there was another sleeper case that was decided called Corner Post, and that actually opens the books opens the ability to do this even more, because every time a regulation is enacted, you have 6 years to challenge it or it's done. Like, no more challenges. That's the statute of limitations. But there was a company that was negatively impacted by a regulation, Corner Post, and they challenged it and got kicked on statute of limitations because it turns out they weren't in existence when this regulation took effect. So they couldn't challenge it. And that's what they said. They said, we weren't even around 20 years ago when this regulation took effect, but it's hurting us. Can't that be when the statute of limitations starts? And the Supreme Court said yes. They said the statute starts on regulatory challenges when the party is injured. So that now means that regulations that have been on the books for decades are potentially, if they're illegal, could potentially be challenged. So you've got a wider statute of limitations and you've got the thumb off the scale. So that's why we think you will see a lot more challenges in court moving forward.
This past season, the Supreme Court was certainly it was very favorable for the small business community, thankfully. And I know you've been personally involved in so many of these. It must have been such a huge relief to see that there was finally some movement for everything that we work so hard to advocate for. What do you see in the future? What is coming up for the regulatory environment? Potential litigation. I know the Prove It Act has been kicked around for an awful long time here. What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I think more and more people are understanding that really what their beef is with government is through the regulations and not through, laws coming out of Congress. And understanding that the regulatory state is is out of control. I mean, it's its own industry. It's one of the biggest employers right now in our country. And so I think you're going to continue to see both the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court has definitely gotten the joke. I mean, every opinion, whether it was Corner Post, Chevron, and even from previous terms, where they talk about even our student loan forgiveness case, quite frankly, where they the court talks about the regulatory state and regulation and agencies and their power over our lives. They understand that it's out of balance. Congress also understands this, and they're hearing more and more from constituents, which I encourage anybody listening to this to talk to their members of Congress and their senators about how regulation is impacting them, because there are solutions out there like the Prove It Act, which we have been on the front lines on. And that act would make sure that the agencies are not just checking the box when it comes to whether or not a regulation is going to hurt a small business, is going to unduly impact a small business. Right now, what we're seeing is the agencies are really not doing that analysis that's required by the law right now well at all. They are certifying rules like the independent contractor rule, not impacting small business, which is insane. Find me a small business owner that is not using an independent contractor. That is not happening. And so this act would allow us, if enacted, to sue the agency when they do that certification. Because right now, we have to wait until the rule's final and got into effect to sue, to say, you know what, you shouldn't have certified that didn't impact small business. And by that point, the game's over, the regulations happened. And I had a case that I was involved in where it had been 5 years, and the court came back and said, yeah, EPA, you should have done an impact analysis for small business. Don't forget to do that next time. Well, okay, it's 5 years later. That's ridiculous. So this would let us remedy it before. And if they don't properly certify, we can, small businesses are exempt from the regulation until they do that analysis, if ever. So that would be great. And we have seen that bill in particular get farther than we've seen any regulatory reform in, I think it's been a decade or two, out of the House Judiciary Committee. It passed out of there. We're hoping to see it get to the House floor this year. Senator Ernst is leading the effort in the Senate, and is going to try to continue to push, especially if we can get it out of the House. So that's where we are there. You can find it on Job Creators Network's website. It's part of our American Small Business Prosperity Plan too. And if you could reach out to your member, tell them you want the House to, reach out to your House member, tell them you want to get it onto the floor, reach out to Senate or House Small Business, tell them you want them to mark it up, and reach out to the Senate and tell them you want it to get passed. So, that is something you could do to get this important legislation across the finish line.
I think a lot of people don't realize how impactful one phone call or one email to their congressional representative can be. It doesn't take long to do. They're easy to find. And there are entire, offices full of staff who are, their role is to keep track of those phone calls and those emails so that their congressional representative has a pulse on what's going on, with their constituents. So, I certainly echo the sentiment that you should absolutely reach out to them, and it really can make a difference. Changing gears a little bit, talk to us about the Corporate Transparency Act and sort of the impact. I don't think that it's as widely understood the impact that this will have on small businesses, not just large corporations.
Right. So this is a sleeper law that Congress passed, I think, a couple of years ago, and now regulations have come out, and it requires every business that has 20 employees or less to file a form with the Financial Crimes Center or something at IRS. Like, I don't even remember what the full name of this outfit at the IRS is. And you have to say on there who owns your company. You cannot give just your employer ID. You have to give your social security. So this is now a new huge database of data, personal data that the government is going to have. And for businesses that started this year, they have to file this within 30 days of starting. If somebody this year in your business becomes a new owner or goes off as an owner, within 30 days, you need to file that amendment. For those that were in existence prior to 2024, you have until January 1 of, or I think December 31st of 2024 this year to file that paperwork. And if you don't, you are subject to, I think it's $10,000, maybe up to $10,000 in civil penalties and a jail time. And so it's, again, only applies, though, to those businesses with 20 or fewer employees. So all the big businesses don't have to worry about this. So they get to not worry about doing this, which is insane. So we did get an extension for compliance, which is why we would have had to already have filed this year, but now it's kicked to next year or the end of this year as a result of that extension. We are pushing for another extension, and we're also trying to get the bill repealed. Tuberville out of Alabama has a bill in the Senate, and Davidson in the House has a bill to do that. And Job Creators is fighting for those changes. In addition, there are a couple of court cases. One has made it already to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, or I think it's Fifth Circuit. But regardless, in a court of appeal. And we filed an amicus brief on that because we also think this law is unconstitutional. We think it's a violation of due process. We think it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment as far as, crimes and punishments and that sort of thing. So, so we're challenging it on those grounds too. And we think it's a violation of privacy.
Karen, what is that particular law? What were they trying to actually combat? Like, I don't understand what that gives the government, and why would they only target businesses with fewer than 20 employees? I mean, it just seems.
So it's actually meant to find people that are tied to terrorism and terrorist organizations, getting funded by them, doing money laundering. And as you know, Jamie and Tony, if you're a money launderer or a terrorist, the one thing you are going to do is properly fill out your government form and tell the truth. So this is really going to help them crack down on that. And that point was made many times to Congress, including by me in Senate testimony at banking. Liars are going to lie, cheaters are going to cheat, stealers are going to steal. And all this is going to do is make well-meaning business owners have to do more paperwork because they will tell the truth and they will file the paperwork, while the people that are terrorists are not going to.
Well, they'll probably check that box that says they're not a terrorist.
Right. Yeah.
Any idea why 20 employees? Is it just an arbitrary number, or?
Tony, everybody knows that terrorists never have more than 20 employees. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious.
Yes, and part of this also was driven, honestly, by the big banks, because they've had to do this paperwork for all of the clients they bank with until this law was enacted, and they wanted to pawn it off on the business owners, and so that's also the reason that this is happening. But yeah, it's the policy reason behind it was the terrorism anti-laundering thing, and that on its face is just laughable because nobody that's disobeying those laws gives one rip about this form and reporting their beneficial owners.
Yeah. Well, Karen, before we end here, I would be remiss not to talk about the tax cuts fight. As many of our listeners and viewers will already know, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed in the end of 2017 is going to end. Most of the income tax changes and a lot of the small business tax changes are going to evaporate at the end of 2025 unless we pass a new law. The corporate tax rates will stay down. But tell us about what we're looking at for next year. Clearly, it's going to be a big fight, and why should people be telling their legislators to pass an extension?
Right. This is critical. I mean, and get ready for the term tax-mageddon, because I think that's what they're going to be calling this moving forward. But yes, as you just rightfully said, the tax cuts that we got through the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act are going away. They are expiring at the end of 2025 unless we get them extended. And we're trying to get them permanently extended. These have been a lifeline for small business owners. Our data is showing that small business owners have been taking advantage of these ever since it acted, and that worse, if they go away, they're going to be laying off employees, reducing inventory, not expanding. And so it's critical that we get that information out there. Another thing that's important to know is there are not many people on the Hill that are currently working for members of Congress or senators that were working there when this was originally passed. They do not understand how important this is to the small business community. So your voice is critical to educate these staffers and these members about why you want to get these tax cuts extended. We are working hard on that. We have a platform, taxcutswork.com, that we have relaunched. It allows you to get in touch with your member. It allows you to it allows you to do testimonials that talk about why these are important to you. We already have testimonials up there from small business owners. Please engage and get on there. Please write your member of Congress, your senator, because we have got to make noise on this. I have to tell you, even Republicans, certain Republicans that are worried about the deficit and debt are a little concerned about extending the tax cuts. So don't assume that just because they are Republican on the Hill, they will be a good vote on this. You need to educate everyone. We know Trump wants them extended, but we've got to get everybody in Congress to also say yes to extending these tax cuts.
Definitely. Well, Karen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. And thank you for taking all the time to listen as a listener here. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back to you soon with another episode. Thanks for listening. Goodbye for now.